Boss Game Studios is a company who many Nintendo 64 fans will already be familiar with. The company started off life as an independent offshoot of Boss Film Studios, the same guys that did the special effects for smash hit movies like Batman Returns, Die Hard and even Starship Troopers. Their first project was on the Nintendo Virtual Boy of all places, where they began making a tank-based simulation game before realising the system was pretty much dead on arrival. So their next game project was the often forgotten Spider the video game on PlayStation 1. I personally always enjoyed that game, but then again I do quite like 2.5D platformers. Around the same time that the company was working with the PlayStation hardware, they also began work on the Nintendo 64, and so began a relationship that would see them pretty much become an exclusive developer for the console. With their company being synonymous with racing games on the N64, let's take a look at their 4 releases on the console, but of course if you are wanting an actual full review of any of these titles, then do check out the links in the description to the individual episodes. Top Gear Rally was perhaps many people's first experience playing a Boss Game Studio title on the Nintendo 64 because it was their debut title. Many people were left in awe at the stunning physics and models in the game because it also had a realistically functioning suspension system in the cars. This included having varying terrain, which also impacted on how your car handled and reacted in certain weather conditions. It's also worth noting that each individual vehicle in the game can be damaged as you're racing, although sadly this didn't impact on the car's performance to give that added level of realism. Many fans of the series from all the way back in the Super Nintendo days also noted the ability to customise your car in the paint shop as being a personal highlight of the game, as well as having the large number of unlockables this game contained. I personally had quite a few gripes with this game, however. I didn't like the overly floaty feel of the cars, and although I can appreciate the floating suspension feature, I don't actually think it makes the game play that well at all. I also hated how, as soon as another car gets on the screen, the frame rate drops, and at times it interferes massively with the timing of your car's handling and turns. The music is also a very love or hate style soundtrack because it's a very slow paced electronic offering. I must admit that it makes a stark contrast from many N64 racing games which had that electric style generic rock music, but at least that gives a sense of urgency and speed. The soundtrack in Top Gear Rally makes it sound like you're going for a relaxing Sunday drive in the Yorkshire Dales rather than trying to push for first place in an epic cross-country race. From what I've read, however, the North American soundtrack does differ from the Japanese and European one, and so for anyone watching stateside, you'll have to make your own judgment as to what you think of the audio work. And speaking of the audio work, it's worth noting that the game was pretty much ported to the PC under the name Boss Rally, but pretty much all of the audio was redone for that version. As an early N64 title, I give this game its props, but it's not a game which I will return to these days. With support for 2 players, you may get a nostalgia kick playing this one with a friend, and perhaps spending some time trying to scrawl swear words onto your car in the paint shop mode, but I'd much rather play any of the other Top Gear series games on the N64 than this one. World Driver Championship is to many people the premier straight racing game on the N64, and in fact I would add myself to that list as well. If you want a simulation racer rather than the glut of arcade style ones on the N64, well, this is really the game that you need to go for. Launched in 1999, many publications describe this one as the N64's answer to the PlayStation's Gran Turismo series. And although I personally can see why they tried to do that because heck, it helps market the game better, each of the games does have their own strengths and weaknesses, which makes a straight shootout between them very difficult. What is worth noting, however, was just how many cool development tricks the company managed to use when building this game. The developer used custom microcode optimization and high polygon count modelling to absolutely push the game's visuals much further than they really should have been able to. This resulted in a great draw distance which pretty much eliminated pop-up and fog, which was a common staple of N64 races at the time. They were also able to stuff in Doppler effect MP3 audio, advanced lighting and weather conditions to make the tracks feel alive, as well as the ability to play the game in high resolution mode even without the expansion pack. So that should give you an idea of just how much the game's engine was optimised for this game. However, no matter how good the game looks, if the gameplay was bad then it wouldn't really matter. Thankfully, the game delivers in all areas, including having a proper career mode that should take you many months to complete. At a time when racing games were still hitting store shelves that could be polished off in a weekend rental, having a simulation racer that had so much depth really was something to behold. There's 10 locations to race, and the multiple routes on each track take the total location count and the total routes in the game to about 60 or so. Add to this again some aggressive drivers, but fair AI opponents, and you have a racing game which really feels like a living, breathing racing experience. There are a few minor problems which you may or may not be bothered by. The physics are quite weak, and it's more of a case of learning how to handle the cars for the game rather than using any actual driving knowledge to become better in the game. There's also no officially licensed cars, but if you are a proper petrol head, then chances are you'll already be able to tell which models the cars are all based off anyway. The music for me was a take it or leave it situation, but overall this definitely is one of the best racing games on the N64, and it's one which I urge everybody to go out and play. Just be prepared though for some initial grinding, because the first cars you have access to really do take a long time to master. Twisted Edge Extreme Snowboarding saw Boss Game Studios switch the tarmac for snow this time around, and it saw them go head to head with Nintendo's own 1080 Snowboarding for the crown as the console's best snowboarding title. It may surprise you, but the game's engine and code is pretty much all recycled from the company's very first N64 title, which was Top Gear Rally. I remember the hype at the time from the gaming media as to which of the two snowboarding games would be the better title, and at one stage Twisted Edge Snowboarding actually had the edge, as it was due to be released a few weeks before Nintendo's own offering. Deciding to push the launch date back by about 4 months meant that 1080 Snowboarding from Nintendo hit store shelves first, and the extra 4 months that Boss Game Studios wanted to fine tune the game was in vain, as Twisted Edge Snowboarding was Boss Game Studios' biggest commercial flop in both sales and critical acclaim. Like Top Gear Rally, I personally feel that the game feels far too floaty in terms of its control style, and although the visuals are at least interesting, the entire game just feels like one slow motion experience, as there's very few moments in the game where you feel any genuine sense of speed. Like many other Boss Game Studios titles, the replay system is brilliant, and your entire race is readily available for you to play back the moment that your actual race ends. They seem to have a knack for actually making the races look half decent in the replays, but with such high competition from Nintendo, it was always going to be an uphill battle, which Boss Game Studios were sadly never able to climb. Stunt Racer 64 is perhaps one of the most interesting racing games on the console, and it's one which many people will have either never heard of or assumed that the generic title meant that it was a bargain basement shelf filler. It's a futuristic racing game with a completely unique style to its presentation. I often describe it as a racing game if the Jetsons and Galaxy High merged into one. Being a later N64 game and a Blockbuster exclusive for rental and sale meant that this title isn't one which many people remember, because really not too many people actually played it at the time of its release. However, it began finding its audience long after the console had demised, and fans went looking for their racing game fixes after all of the better known titles had been exhausted. As you'll race, you'll earn cash by doing stunts and flips and barrel rolls, and you'll be able to use this cash to spend to upgrade your car or just to buy brand new ones. There's a decent amount of content here and some tough as nails boss races, but what I personally liked the most was that there's actually a fair old amount of grinding. I don't normally like grinding as a mechanic in games, as it's often used to artificially flesh out the length of a game, but here it actually managed to keep a good balance between the speed that rewards are dished out to keep you coming back. The music is just as trippy as the rest of the presentation, and it has a retro jazz lounge style music to it. Trust me, you're either going to love it or hate it, but when racing games on the N64 are often packed full of the same old generic riffs, it's actually quite refreshing for something a little different and a little more unique, even if every music track in the game isn't a winner. With tight control, good visuals and audio, and a decent amount of depth in its gameplay, it's one that I'd urge absolutely everybody to play. It is still quite expensive, and so if you do want a cheaper alternative, then why not try Hot Wheels Turbo Racing? But if you do have the budget available to you, then do yourself a favour and add this game to your collection. And so there you have it. They may not have been the most prolific studio on the console, but they had a good innings, and I feel that they definitely left their mark as a developer on the console's history. It's just a shame that their best work, which I'd say was Stunt Racer 64, didn't reach the audience it potentially should have, and their most commercially successful title was their debut game on the console. So what is your favourite of the Boss Game Studios N64 releases? Sound off in the comments section down below, and until next time.